Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure you are excited about the fact that today is the day that the Democrats take control of the United States House of Representatives and Nancy Pelosi is elected Speaker of the House. Today is that important day, and we'll begin to see what they want, and we're going to talk to David Brody about what he thinks they want. And it seems like to me what they want to do is destroy President Trump, regardless of what it is. But there's still a fight on the border, and we'll be talking about that on this program. And here is my lovely co-hostess to tell us more.
Yeah. Well, the president is going to try again tomorrow to get a deal with the Democrats on his border wall. But they're also focusing on their own agenda on other issues. Charlene Aaron has the story.
As the new Democratic House is sworn in today, they're faced with the ongoing battle over funding the president's proposed border wall. After a meeting at the White House Wednesday, Democrats again refused to give the president and the GOP money for a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border. Democrats have made an offer on the budget, but it doesn't include funding for a wall.
We're asking the president to open up government. We are giving him a Republican path to do that. Why would he not do it? Why would he not do it?
The president hosting a bipartisan briefing on border security in the Situation Room with no end in sight to the partial government shutdown, now in its 13th day.
Could be a long time, or it could be quickly. Could be a long time. It's too important a subject to walk away from.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says the president couldn't give a good answer why the shutdown should continue.
The only reason that they are shutting down the government is very simple. They want to try and leverage that shutdown into their proposals on border security.
Earlier, the president at his first cabinet meeting of the new year, again making the case for his southern border wall.
We're asking for 5.6, and somebody said 2.5. No, look. This is national security we're talking about.
House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy says Democrats didn't even want to hear about how bad the situation at the border is. He said the Democrats quickly interrupted Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen when she tried to explain it and didn't even listen to her. And McCarthy said the president asked lawmakers to discuss other ways to end the shutdown.
Both sides can sit down, find a compromise that actually secures the border.
The two sides will meet again Friday, and the showdown could last a good while yet, even as House Democrats are planning their own agenda of investigations into the president and other measures, like taking on climate change and possible health care legislation. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Well, it's sad when the greatest nation on earth to be wallowing around. I want to point out something that Jesus said that is so profound. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. We're a great nation, the greatest nation the world has ever known. And we're fighting on partisan bickering that is just not worthy of a great nation. Well, with us now from Washington is our chief national political correspondent, David Brody. David, what do you think? You know what the Democrats want?
Look, Pat, there is no end in sight as it relates to what the Democrats and the Republicans want in terms of this partial government shutdown. I can tell you that, and there's so much to discuss. We can get to the Democrat House in a moment. But in terms of that shutdown, the question, talking to the White House this morning and saying, what's the off-ramp here? What's the off-ramp for the folks inside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? What's the off-ramp for Democrats? And let me do a visual of the answer. I don't know. I mean, that's pretty much what they were saying. And they don't know. They are steadfast inside the White House in terms of not budging. We'll see. I think the sense is that if they can get half of that $5.6 billion or so, they're going to be very happy and they'll take that. The problem is, as a senior White House official told me this morning, that meeting between Pelosi and Schumer and the president yesterday went south quickly because basically what happened, and this is being relayed from someone inside the room to me who saw it all go down. Basically, Secretary Nielsen started that meeting, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, to give a whole overview, a briefing, if you will, to the Democrats as to what's going on at the border. And right away, 5 seconds in, and that's the actual number, 5 5 seconds in, Chuck Schumer looked over at Nancy Pelosi and whispered, Nancy, and at that point, Nancy Pelosi spoke up, interrupted the Department of Homeland Security secretary and said, look, we don't want to hear about any of this. We want to talk about how we're going to get this all solved. So they didn't want to be brought to the White House to hear any of these numbers that the Department of Homeland Security was talking about.
Well, deliberate obfuscation. They don't want to be informed as to what's happening on our border. Don't they understand this is a very important thing that they should deal with?
Well, and that's the White House's position. They say, how in the world can you ignore facts that are coming not from Donald Trump or from anybody else specifically, but coming from the Department of Homeland Security? By the way, made up of some bureaucrats here, Pat. I mean, this is the United States government giving facts, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, according to the White House, did not want to hear any of that. You know, some of the facts that the White House was giving me this morning from DHS, 60,000 unaccompanied minors already made their way to the border this year. That's 25% more than in previous years. 60,000 unaccompanied minors. Humanitarian issue there, obviously, Pat. They also say, and this is information that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi never heard because Kirstjen Nielsen couldn't get it out, but 30% of those women that are coming on the caravans are being raped. 70% of folks overall on those caravans, men and women included, are being assaulted somehow. So you have a humanitarian crisis. Democrats talk about wanting to be these wonderful humanitarians, but they weren't having any of those statistics yesterday.
Well, David, what exactly is happening? It looks like that ICE or the Homeland Security or somebody is letting a lot of these immigrants in. They're just coming into El Paso and cities like that. Is it really a flood already?
Well, it's gotten worse, for sure, and this has been a big part of the problem. As a matter of fact, I can just go down the list here, but I mean, there's so many different statistics, but they're saying that 17,000 convicted criminals actually entered the United States in just the last year alone. Once again, convicted criminals, not because they broke a law by entering the United States. They were already convicted of crimes in Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, wherever it happens to be, and they were coming in and they were apprehended. So the White House clearly feels this is obviously a serious humanitarian issue as well as a legal one and a safety one. We'll see how it ends. Pat, I got to tell you, here's the problem for President Trump and this White House. They're not just fighting Democrats on the wall. The dirty little secret in Washington is that there are a lot of establishment Republicans that don't want the wall either. The problem is the debate has been framed about wall or nothing, and it really has never been about that. I know the president went on the campaign trail in 2016 and said we're going to build the wall. But the truth of the matter is the White House wants a wall. They want infrared cameras. They want Border Patrol agents. They want the whole kit and caboodle. It just hasn't been framed that way. One other important point to point out, remember the Secure Fence Act in 2006? That was under George W. Bush. It was signed by George W. Bush. 700 miles of fencing authorized by Congress in 2006. And among the folks that voted for that at the time, Chuck Schumer, Hillary Clinton, and Senator Barack Obama. Something to think about.
Let me ask you on this whole thing, though, of border security. It's more than that, isn't it? I mean, why don't the Democrats want some kind of comprehensive immigration reform? That's at the heart of it. I mean, how can we... I mean, the wall sure will keep people out, and I know the president wants to have the wall first and then immigration reform later, but the Democrats don't want immigration reform at all, do they?
No, they don't. Well, they don't want the wall for sure, and the reason is that it's become a dirty word. I mean, the wall is in essence synonymous for some things that you know, the Democrats don't believe that America should stand for, this idea of a wall. And I think people have gotten really caught up in that. The Democrats, for sure, have gotten caught up in that. They're just not going to give a penny for this wall. So I think that's the question that has to be answered going forward. You know, it's interesting because one of the potential solutions here could be a DACA for the wall money or for the border security money. In other words, a DACA fix. That would be something Democrats in the past would have agreed to. But at this point, look, they're all in with their base, those incoming freshmen, the progressives, and they're all in on no wall funding at all. Nancy Pelosi actually out today with a new interview saying not a dime. So how do you compromise? I mean, I know in kindergarten, aren't you supposed to meet halfway? I don't know what's happened to compromise. Dirty word in Washington.
Well, David, what do you think? I mean, the so-called progressives of the far left are moving into positions, and a number are running for president. So we're looking at a upcoming campaign that is as far to the left as we've ever imagined for example, health insurance for the whole country, which would bankrupt us. Well, what are we going to do?
Well, Pat, this is the big problem for the Democrats. You know, this is going to be a big day, obviously, in Washington. Nancy Pelosi will get the speaker's gavel and all of these incoming freshmen. And it's going to be flowers and candy galore for the Democrats today. This will be their day for sure. The longer-term question for the Democrats is, what do they do with these 60-plus incoming freshmen, many of them progressive in nature, who want that Medicare for all, who want this new Green Deal is what they're calling it, Green Jobs Bill. As a matter of fact, they're setting up a select committee when they come in. The Democrats are setting up a select committee on climate change. Look, I think the question becomes, how far to the left are they going to go? And honestly, Pat, back in 2010, when the Tea Party came along 8 years ago or so, the Republicans had this similar problem. You know, it was the Tea Party coming in, and mainstream Republicans were like, oh, no, are we going to go too far to the right? So I think we're seeing that 8 years later. One other thing very important to point out, Pat, for everybody at home, there are two tracks here with the Democrats. Let's just get this out of the way right now. The Democrats are not going to pass any legislation that Donald Trump will sign into law unless Donald Trump wants to sign it into law. So in other words, there will be no legislation. As much as legislation comes out of a Democrat House, McConnell's not bringing anything up that won't have the votes Republican-wise to pass. So where's the power that the Democrats will have? Well, you know, and we've talked about this. It's the gavel. That's what it is. They're going to investigate everything. Donald Trump's tax returns, possible money laundering at the Trump Organization. You got the Russia investigation. I mean, it's going to be the whole kit and caboodle to the point where will they overplay and extend or overplay their hand? And I think that's a big danger as well.
Well, David, you know, a determined foe can just drive somebody absolutely crazy with demands for documents, for demands for interrogatories, with depositions. You know how the game's played, and you can take a poor, member, a person in a lawsuit, and just drive him out of business. And it looks like that they're learning that game. And if they pursue it, they can literally shut down everything Trump wants to do with that kind of attack. They can, I mean, people in the executive agencies won't have time to do anything else except to meet the demands of people who are coming after them.
Pat, it's going to be nonstop. It's going to be subpoena after subpoena after subpoena. It's going to drive not only the White House a bit batty, but it's going to, in essence, bring Washington to a grinding halt. And if we thought the first 2 years with this White House were a bit, if not chaotic, they were disruptive in terms of Democrats and Republicans getting along, 2019 is going to be triple that amount. I mean, it's going to get nasty, and it's going to get nasty very quickly because, in essence, the responsibility that Congress has had for, well, honestly, hundreds of years, back to the late 1790s with George Washington when they were doing with committee investigations even back then, it's gone from investigating and getting to the truth of the matter to really becoming political. And Newt Gingrich admits this. In the 90s, they did it. The Republicans did it. Watergate. I mean, we can go back. We can go on and on about all of this. I mean, even back to the McCarthy hearings. Look, this has been political from day one, and we are going to see political times 20 in 2019.
Assuming the president, in some off moment, is watching this program, what would you tell him? I mean, how are you going to counter all of these attacks?
Well, no, it's a good question, Pat. Obviously, the analysis part of it is you've got to just be ultimately who you are. It's what got him elected. He's got to stay true to his principles, but that's with any politician, really. I mean, in other words, you've got to be who you are, and you can't budge from that. At the same time, it's interesting because Donald Trump could easily work with Democrats on infrastructure, on DACA, on a few other things. I mean, he's not a Republican, as we've talked before. He's a Trump-publican is what he is. Mm-hmm. And so, therefore, he's willing to deal with Democrats, but they will not budge 1 inch. They want to see him fail, Pat. That is the bottom line. But here's the reality. They can impeach this president. They can remove him, if you will, or they can try to remove him from office. They can defeat him in 2020. Let's say it all happens, Pat. Here's the bottom line. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and a generation of Supreme Court potential 5-4 decisions. That's something they can't take away, and it's a stain that they're going to have to live with from their perspective.
David, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I just would say you ought to pray for the president, because I tell you, a motivated opponent in a law school can literally drive you out of your mind. There's no end of subpoenas, no end of requests for depositions, no end of requests for documents. And when you're dealing with the federal government, they're talking about millions of pages of documents, and they're never happy. Well, you've got to give us more documents. We've got to hear more about this. And it can keep every person on a enterprise totally occupied answering subpoenas. And that's what, Judicial Watch and others, they've taught the Democrats how to do it. And now the so-called Freedom of Information request you can go crazy with it. And it'll shut down every single initiative that's coming out of our government. We will be paralyzed as a nation.
So much for civility.
Oh, for civility, forget it.
Yeah.
Long since gone.
Also, so much for the country's moving forward, because when you're focused on someone else's issues, when you're focused on negativity, then nothing's happening in a positive way for any of us, really.
Sherry, you're absolutely right. And it just, again, the words of Jesus just ring through the ages. A house divided can't stand. A kingdom divided can't stand. And this kingdom, it used to be people were elected for the good of the country, and they swore an oath to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And they were going to support the president. He's the only president we've got. He represents our nation. And the Congress was going to do their job to try to bring forth intelligent legislation to make us a better country to live in. The president was going to work to make his work done to execute the laws. That's what he's supposed to do. He's not supposed to make the laws. Supreme Court is not supposed to make the laws. They're supposed to faithfully interpret. Now, that's what we want. But, what we've got, there was an article today about the lady who used to be editor of the New York Times that said this thing is just so left-wing. And now you've got a press with the New York Times, the Washington Post leading the charge that are absolutely gone over the edge on being leftist. It used to be, we'll print all the news that fits and, without fear or favor and all that stuff. No longer. Yeah. No longer. They're strictly partisans, and they don't care what they write or how they write it, but everything is slanted. And so we're dealing in a country, ladies and gentlemen, this is a great country. I love this country, and I think you should love this country, and we all should love this country, but we ought to do what we can to make it a better, wonderful place for the next generation.